sister Aisha Pella, my co-worker Catherine Gillette, and also Julia are all here. More than 400 years ago, years of racist policies, laws, practices have deprived Black people fair access to participation in our shared cultural, political, social, and economic life. The sinful legacy of white supremacy and the enduring racial wealth gap does not deny Black people good health, educational, and economic outcomes any longer. Establishing a federal reparations commission in the United States is a second way that we may understand and address our past and build new. Now is the time for reparations. And I would like to welcome Greg Clifford. Welcome us all here to this community.
Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
I am Gregory Clifford, a longtime parishioner and one of the lay leaders here at St. Aloysius Parish. On behalf of Sister Mary Jean Raymond, OSU, our parish life coordinator, and the faithful parishioners of St. Aloysius, St. Agatha Catholic Parish, I want to welcome you to our parcel of holy ground here in Cleveland's Glenville neighborhood for repair and redress, a prayer vigil for reparations. God is good. And all the time. This evening we gather for an opportunity for truth-telling, lament, prayer, and a communal commitment to act, to name and address the sinful legacy of slavery and its aftermath in Cleveland and all across the United States. More than 400 years of racist policies, laws, and socially accepted practices have deprived Black people fair access to participation in our shared cultural, political, educational, social, and economic life. The sinful legacy of white supremacy and the enduring racial wealth gap must not deny, acknowledge, name, understand, and address our shameful past and build a new. We can lead the way to promote an anti-racist society in our great country. Now is the time, and this is the perfect place to start. Thank you for joining us. Together, with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, we can make a difference. Thank you.
And now it is our great honor to welcome Reverend Tracy Blackman to this space. Reverend Tracy is the Associate General Minister of Justice and Local Church Ministries for the United Church of Christ, a denomination inspired by God's grace to welcome all, love all, and seek justice for all through God-centered action, Christ-driven connection, and spirit-led leadership. As a public theologian, Reverend Blackman's voice is featured on many local, national, and international platforms, spanning the breadth of the White House to the Carter Center to the Vatican, as well as several documentaries and print publications. She currently serves as pastor in residence for Eden Theological Seminary in Webster Groves, Missouri.
Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I have a big mouth, so I'm sure you'll be able to hear me this evening. It is such an honor to be here with you tonight in this beautiful space, in this space that honors those who are up for sainthood in the Catholic Church, in this space that hosts this country. In this space where we worship and work and witness. I am grateful to be here. It just so happens I believe that it is divinely inspired because I don't live in Cleveland. I work here, and I just happen to be in town this week because the United Church of Christ is moving its offices. And how appropriate it is in this moment that I received this call from my friends at Network and a call from our economic justice minister, who is not in town right now, to see if I would come. Because most of this week I have been working on a conference room in the United Church of Christ that will be named the Amistad Room. If you are familiar with the United Church of Christ, you know that for over 30 years we have been at 700 Prospect Avenue. And that church building was well known for its chapel, the Amistad Chapel. The reason the United Church of Christ has an Amistad Chapel is because we were formed in part by Congregationalists. And Congregationalists were a part of those who funded and fought for the rebellion on Amistad, that those enslaved people who overturned that ship might go free. And free indeed they did go. That does not mean that we have done all that we should do toward reparations, or all that we should do towards truth-telling. But freedom and reparations are not just about those who have been impacted by enslavement. Freedom and reparations talk is necessary for the liberation of both Black and white people. I want to be very clear about that. I can't think of better words to start this in terms of talking about reparations than to use some of the words intermingled with mine from Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, who is currently leading this fight. For nearly 3 decades, Representative John Connors of Michigan would introduce H.R. 40 legislation seeking to establish a commission to study and develop reparation proposals. As difficult as it has been to get this legislation passed, just to have a commission, you would think that talking about it is going to cost us something. For years, people have been trying to get a commission just to study what is necessary. And though many thought it was a lost cause, Representative Connors believed that a day would come when our nation would need to account for the brutal mistreatment of African-descended people through chattel slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and the enduring structural racism endemic to our society. With the rise and normalization of white supremacist oppression once again among us, the discussion of H.R. 40 and the concept of restorative justice has gained more urgency. Recently, I was in East Buffalo because of what happened at Cops. And as grieved as I was by those who were killed by someone who lost his love, I'm not sure he lost his mind, but he lost his love and killed these people in this grocery store that he planned to kill. I was more grieved by the economic conditions of East Buffalo. I was more grieved by the fact that the closing of one grocery store because of this violence This country has yet to atone for the atrocities visited upon generations of enslaved Africans and their descendants. Moreover, the mythology built around the Civil War has obscured our discussions of the impact of chattel slavery and made it difficult to have a national dialogue on how to fully account for its place in American history and public yourself up by your bootstraps. And that indeed may be true if you have some boots. The problem is, Black people for far too long have been asked to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and have been denied the opportunity to have boots. I want to be clear. I am not talking about charity when I talk about reparations. My ancestors earned what we're asking for. I am not talking about charity when we talk about reparations. Blood and sweat and toil has gone from my ancestors into this country just as everyone else has contributed. We are asking for fairness in the conversation. Black America's unemployment rate is more than twice that of white Americans. Black families have just 1/16 of the wealth of white families. In St. Louis, where I live, there's a street called the Del Mar Divide. I don't know what street it is in Cleveland, but in most major cities, there's a street that will give you a line of demarcation between the haves and the have-nots. Del Mar Divide is our street. And across that one street, there is a 26-year lifespan difference in the life of a white man on the south side of Del Mar and the life of a Black man on the north side of Del Mar. This is not just about money, it is about saving lives, saving legacies, saving history, and dare I say, saving souls. Through remote in time for the period of enslavement, these racial disparities in access to education and healthcare and housing and insurance and employment and other social goods are directly attributable to the damaging legacy of slavery and racial discrimination. As we approach Juneteenth one more time to talk about freedom, let's not just talk about freedom as an imagination. Let's talk about freedom as a call to action. I've often said to people, I don't need anybody to give me a fish. I'm a Black woman in America. I know how to fish where there is no water. I'm an expert fisher. That's the only way I have survived. Reparations is about the church and the people and the society moving from charity to justice, moving from handouts to hand up, moving from simply offering to give someone a fish to giving them access to the lake so that they can fish for themselves. It is not what we are begging for. It's the payment that we are due. God bless you.
As we move into our next portion of the evening, we are going to hear stories from 4 members of the Cleveland community here, who will share their life stories as a ritual of truth-telling. I would now like to welcome Eugene Jones.
Good evening. That's a hard act to follow. It's a tremendous presentation and very enlightening. Thank you. In 1973, I graduated from Cathedral Latin High School. And until that time, I think I had a very privileged upbringing. My grandmother and mother had to attend the funeral in Montgomery, Alabama, where they were born and raised. And of course, I preface this by saying they were born in Montgomery, Birmingham, and Redress, Alabama. And part of our history is the elders sharing stories of how they were raised and what they survived to become the people that they were, that they are today. Some of those lessons means that you have to hear stories about lynchings, shootings, people being tarred and feathered. And that was a part of my history. And it was also a part of my rage. Because it angered me because my people had to survive incidents like that. But in 1973, when I took them to a funeral, there were two funerals in Redress, Alabama at that time. We had family from Detroit at one funeral, and my family was in Montgomery at another funeral. An incident took place with the police and the county sheriff's in that county where they thought they was mistaking identity. They busted into my family's residence and there was a shooting. My family was arrested, but it was a justifiable shooting. They were released before the weekend was over so we could go to the funeral. I had never experienced anything like that before because I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. The stark reality was that entire weekend, those 4 or 5 days when I was with my family, there was a constant police presence. I had never, ever been told that I couldn't look a white man or white woman in the face. But that weekend they told me, if we go to the mall, you can't do what you do up in Cleveland at the malls and when you go to different places. They told me how dangerous it would be if I actually looked a white person in the face or looked at him eye to eye. I had never in my life looked down or not looked directly into any man, woman, or child's eyes. I had never looked down to anyone. But for the first time in my life when I was with my family, I had to do that because it was my cousins, my uncles, my nephews, my entire family had endured that for a lifetime. And then finally I had to accept the reality that these 4 or 5 days that I was with them, I had to do something that I'd never done before. And I did it. When I was in that mall, I understood why I did it. It was to survive. Because I had never, ever heard or endured the things that were being said or some of the things that were being done to my cousins. After enduring that, we had the opportunity to make sure that our families came to rest and were put to rest. On the way home, I was on an old country road and I had my mother and my grandmother in the car with me. And on the way home, they told me, they said, look, because of the atmosphere that was created, because of the weekend that had transpired, that if we got stopped by the police, they told me that I had to pull out my driver's license and registration, and look forward and not allow any officer or anybody else to upset me into doing something. I had a plan that if something did happen, that I would sacrifice myself to make sure that my mother and my grandmother could get home safely. But as the county sheriffs or police officers approached the car, and I asked them why I had been stopped, They told me that I was not doing the speed limit. I did not know what racial profiling was, but I was driving a 1973 Cadillac in 1973, and I got stopped going 30 where the speed limit was 35. And behind me, I could hear my mother and my grandmother tell me, please just hand them your driver's license and your registration, and don't show your anger or be upset. As I did that, I was shaking like a leaf, and I could hear them in my ear telling me and praying, please, Lord, just calm me down. Allow him to do what he needs to do so he can get us home safely. So I handed the officer, the county sheriff, my driver's license and proof of registration, and I asked him why he stopped me. He said that I was going too slow. Those incidents that took place that weekend, and that incident where I was profiled, taught me a valuable lesson, something that I carry with me to this day. I realized that the stories that my parents and my grandparents and my family had told me, those were things and stories that I have to share with my child, my grandchildren, my nieces and nephews, so they can be strong enough to have faith in humanity, to have faith that they're good people with good character that will not act in that manner. And it's something that stuck with me then, it's still with me today. And it brings back so many memories when I was younger, but I benefited from it because it made me a better human being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for being with us here tonight and sharing. I would next like to welcome Leo Avon Neville.
Hello, church. Powerful words we're hearing today. Hard to follow. Pretty much, they can say everything I was going to say out there. Thank you to be able to stand here and be able to say some things about experience, growing up as a young black man. I grew up in this community. I grew up in this Glenville community. And growing up wasn't all good. It wasn't all what others would have. Being young and black in an urban, poor community. A community that education is quality. You rush for it, you choose for it, you have to fight for it. Community where violence occurs every day and every night. Racism to the point where you have to take a deep breath and wonder, what do you want to do? What can I do? And only thing I can think of is prayer. Prayer. And at the same time, my brothers and sisters here in the community and all around the world saying prayer, Cleo, prayer. Yes, we heard the folks say prayer. That's what God said. But we need a little more help. We need a little bit, we need to be united. Racism separates. We need to be togetherness. We need to teach one. We need to tell one. Everyone in here knows when they walk through those doors, St. Aloysius, which is a cornerstone in the Glenville community, which is a safe haven. This Catholic church is here. People feel good to know us here. We need help though. We need help to stop the racism. We need help to educate. Thank you.
I would like to share a couple of experiences that I have growing up and in my current life regarding racism. I grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and one of my earliest experiences of racism came when I was a little girl, and I lived on a street called Yorkshire. And on the corner of Yorkshire was a street called Byrights. And the little kid, as kids on the weekends, we would gather in Byrights. And next to Byrights, there was a family, a white family. And we all knew each other. We all played together as kids. Their children were a little bit older than the other kids in the neighborhood. But they called the police on us. They called the police on 8, 9, and 10-year-olds who were doing nothing but playing in the grocery store parking lot when it was closed on Sunday. And that was one of my first experiences of racism because the police cars came and they put us in the cars. And it upset my parents, as it should have, so much. And needless to say, we had no further relationship with that family because, as we all know, when the police get involved, sometimes things can go wrong, and sometimes things can go wrong even as little children. Like every African American here, there are so many stories to tell. I have so many stories to tell. Just like every woman here probably has a story to tell, being a woman and inappropriate things happening. Another disturbing experience, I went to the University of Cincinnati. I majored in psychology, and I was a very good writer. And I remember being accused by a TA of plagiarizing. And that has happened to me more than once, and it was a Black young woman TA. And I remember her telling me, Yvonne, he said that you could not have possibly written that paper. That could not have come from you, and that was so, of course, very upsetting. And I knew it was racist. You know, no one else was being accused of that. I knew it was that. Another kind of recent experience that I had when Cleo and I, when we were dating, and my best friend lives in Euclid, and I asked Cleo to go and fix his car, my best friend's car in Euclid. And there was a call that came in the apartment complex that my best friend lived in. There was a call that came in, apparently over the radio, that there's somebody with a truck out there messing with people's cars. So my then boyfriend, my now husband, drove his car and out of the parking lot after he finished or tried to finish fixing the car, They pulled guns on him. It was in the wintertime. Pulled guns on him, made him get out of the car, made him for about, Cleo told me about 15, 20 minutes, hit the dirt on the, not the dirt, hit the snow in Euclid, hands behind his head while they figured out why this black man was in this apartment complex in Euclid. And that was extremely, extremely disturbing. I am an attorney. I wanted to sue the entire city of Euclid after that. My husband felt lucky and blessed to be alive after that incident, so he said, fine, just let it go. Just let it go. And I'm sure so many black men have had that very same experience of, I got out of it alive, so we just gonna let it go. I don't want to go on too long, but since we're talking about experiences, there's been so many experiences of what I feel racism as an attorney, and one happened maybe about 15 years ago. I was in bankruptcy court, and I was filling in for another attorney, and an attorney from my office. And that attorney, I just needed to get what's called a continuance. So when you go in court, you come before the judge, you state your name, and you state your phone number, sometimes you state your bar number. And I said, my name is Yvonne Harris, I'm filling in for whatever the attorney's name was. And, but I need to respectfully ask for a continuance. I thought everything was good. So I went back to my office. I had given them my phone number. The judge's bailiff then called my office and said to my secretary, is she really an attorney? Is she really a lawyer? Instead of obviously calling me and saying, can I get your bar number, and just looking it up, I had to be humiliated in front of my secretary like I did something wrong, and was questioned. And I know that a white male or a white female attorney would never have been humiliated and questioned like that. When all you had to do was call me, I'll give you my bar number. And you call Supreme Court of Ohio and they will verify who I am. I had so many instances of that, of being, and I was very well dressed as a younger attorney, of being called, oh, you must be the secretary. You could not possibly have been the lawyer. So we're here to share experiences, and that is my brief synopsis of just a few. I haven't even delved into it, just a few of the things that this happened to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne and Cleo. Next, I would like to welcome Dana Baker.
Greetings. Yes, I am Dana Baker. I am a long-time parishioner here. And I'm going to start my story with my grandfather. My grandfather looked like he was white, but he wasn't. We're flying up Lakeview, right here, next to St. Aloysius Rectory. He had a long green station wagon. I'm in the back of his drive. I mean, farming. Saw one of my friends, and I'm just waving, hey. Lo and behold, on Monday, I got asked, I saw you with that white man. I said, what white man? The one who was driving the station wagon. Where was he taking me? To my aunt's house who lived down on Lakeview. So make a long story short, my mother said she had experienced the same thing because one of our neighbors wanted to know who was the white man. Does your husband know that this white man comes to your house? I too was raised in Glenville. I still live on 103rd north of St. Clair. Live in my parents' house. So it's so ironic as we move along. I just recently retired from one of the major hospitals. I'm at work. Young woman walks up to the counter. I used to be the baker, Dana Baker. And the young woman walked up to the counter that I worked at, and she needed to order bagels. So one of my coworkers says, Dana, she wants 4 dozen bagels. I said, well, she can't have what's on the wall, but I'll bake off some more. I walked up to the counter to explain to her, you know, I'll bake them off, it's not gonna take that long. And she looked at me, backed up and told me to shut my blanket mouth and to give her her blanket bagels. So I totally, my head spun around and I came back at her. They had to been for one of my coworkers. He literally moved me out of the way and he took care of this lady. I said, we don't have the bagels on the wall because we're gonna have a problem here. Well, lo and behold, she sat back, this man, big man, height, weight, everything. He wanted to talk to the person that talked to her. I said, it's me. He tells me, and he started, I told him, did she tell you what she said to me? He backed up, looked at me and says, no, she did not tell me what she said to you. He apologized several times. Several times. She was mad, she was pregnant, not my fault. She probably forgot she was supposed to get 4 dozen of bagels. That's still not my fault. So, going up to maybe about 10 years ago, we all love going to the theater. I appreciate the theater. And at the time I had dreadlocks, long dreadlocks. And I have a friend who likes to get to the theater early. She's sitting down below, I'm up in the balcony. I'm just happy to be there. And as he came in, I started laughing to myself. I said, I'm the only ink spot in the sea of white people. And I'm sitting there, the music's playing. It's going to be a great play. The head usher came up from my left, looked me dead in the eye and says, you, I need to see you. He comes up on my right, I need to see your ticket. So I guess I was supposed to have made my ticket down in the lobby in my pocketbook, walk past the usher at the door, walk past the ushers on the floor, up in the balcony, and says, you need to come with me. I said, oh, I'm not going to go place with you. Well, the couple to my left says, he just racially profiled you. I said, yes. I'm sitting in the theater down here with you. Yes, he did. He didn't have on a name tag. But I took care of the situation because when I got finished flapping my mouth after the play, I enjoyed the play, it was wonderful. I got all kinds of freebies. I got free tickets to other plays. I was very nice and very kind. My mother always told me to be gracious, be kind, because that's one thing folks can't stand. Can't stand. But then I got one more, and I'm gonna go back to when I was a child. When I started here at St. Aloysius, the building behind us was all classrooms, now our gym. And I had to repeat the first grade, and I'm sitting in the first grade room in the big building over here. And I had a little girl sitting in front of me. She had a ponytail. And her little fat little friend was sitting right across from her. That little girl swung her ponytail in my face one time too many. And when I reached up and yanked her head back, I'm looking at her face. And she says, and when I let her hair go, she turned around and stood up and told me, well, I at least had the same father. And I'm like, I guess I was Dusty Dora. Like, I got the same father. I got 6 siblings and we all got the same parents. So I didn't know what she was talking about. And as I got older, it clicked in. She was trying to insinuate that my mother and my father have children all over the place. No, no, no. I was raised by 2 beautiful parents, Howard and Louise. My father was 95 when he passed. He never talked about the South. My mother, who was raised in Philadelphia, and she was 85. Gracious, beautiful, Black people. So I too thank you. I thank my church family. I thank my parents, my grandparents, because as a young child, I did not see color. And the first time I had someone white call me a nigger, I was walking down Euclid and looked around. I literally turned around. Who are you talking to? Because I had never been called that. I have never had the experience as you grow, return from a hospital, and to now. It's live, it's kicking, it's screaming. We got to stop it. It hurts. I have young nieces and nephews. I've got relatives down south. And when one year I went to see my brother, and he lived in Stone Mountain. He came upstairs, knocked on the door, told me, get up, let's go. I was like, hey, I just got here. He says, we got to go. Stone Mountain, they would have the Ku Klux Klan rally. And I'm like, oh, what could I say? But we had to go. So further ado, I thank you for listening to me, because this has been truly an experience.
Thank you, Dana. And our final truth teller tonight is Walter Morris.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I initially had no intention on speaking. I just wanted to come and be a part of this today. But as I drove over, I thought about a few things that happened, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to speak because I have ancestors, my grandparents, who have told stories that need to be told. And there are other organizations and businesses who wanted to tell their stories and publish them, and that just wasn't the right circumstance. And being here with my church family, I think this is the right place and the right circumstance to tell these stories. Some of the earliest memories that I can recall were visiting Mounds County, Alabama with my grandmother. My grandmother was 102 when she passed away a few years ago. And she made it her business to make sure that we went down home with her every year, or just about every year if we could. And the way this came up in a company that I work with, they gave out these calendars that talked about soil and different things from different places around the country that had ties to lynchings and whatnot. And one of the places was Mounds County. Now, my family owned over 100 acres of land and still down there. And when my grandmother would tell stories, like if it, as the sun is about to set here, my grandmother, if we were down south, she would say, okay, it's time to go. And I'm like, Grandma, the trees, the breeze is beautiful, the sun. And she said, nope, time to go. And I asked her, why do you always want to get out before it's sundown? And she told me stories about her uncles. Her uncles were some of the people who were taken, never to be seen again. Members of the surrounding communities, white people and clan members would come, they came and took her uncles and lynched them, and she was young and still remembered that. And it was around the time, around sunset, and it's something that she never forgot. And she had fear, even in her 90s and into her 100-year age, she had this fear of white people that never left her to the day she died. And that's something that I will never forget. When she would, to see a person that is so confident in so many different things, almost have this, you can see the childlike anxiety in her when she talked about those stories and those things that happened. It is something that I will definitely never forget. And then I think about my maternal grandparents, who, my grandmother was a teacher and they were both parishioners here at the school. My grandmother is of Irish descent. And telling the story about how she was an orphan and how she was so overlooked and how so many things happened. And one of the only reasons they were even able to live in this and move into this community in the 1950s is because she was a lady who could pass the white. So when she became a teacher here at this school, it was her mission to have an African American history program where she taught about African American history and put on plays and gave confidence. At her funeral, there were people who were coming up to us here who said, your grandmother made such a lasting impact in my life. Because these things happen to us as African American people. And it's about, I read a book some years ago, a gentleman was married. He said it's not always just about what happens to you, it's about how you use that as fuel and as power to be a beacon to overcome those things that happen to you. Some of my earliest memories, I was at St. Cecilia Church with my mom. And my parents, my whole family was there, but I'm still, my dad is my guy. He's in his 70s now. I love both of my parents, My mom and my sisters were in there. They were doing some type of event. And I wanted to stay out. We didn't have much money, but somehow my parents had to go down there. So I stayed in the parking lot with my father. And all of a sudden, we were surrounded by police officers, guns drawn. And they had my father. He had to, get down on his knees and everything. And I was about 4 years old. And I said, the only thing I could say is, officer, can I go get my mom? And they just looked at me, because they didn't even really pay attention to the fact that I was there. I said, yeah, sure, kid. So I go and get my mom, and my mom comes out, she's crying and everything, and she's like, what's going on? And they look at their eyes, it was just something I'll never forget. And when it turned out, they had the wrong person, never any apology, never any, nothing like that. So as a young person, you don't forget those types of things. And I'll share one more story with you. It wasn't until I finished undergraduate school and I went to Mexico to live. And I was with a group of friends and some other professors, and we wanted to go to a club or something. And they said they couldn't go into that club, but I could. And as an African American, you don't hear that often. Where's the place that I can go that other people can't? So I said, why can't I go? Why can't you all go into this club? And they said, well, because we're dark-skinned Mexican people, so we can't go into this club. I said, well, I'm dark-skinned. Why can't I go? They said, because you're American. Now, I was 23 years old, lived in this country my entire life. My grandfather fought in this country during World War II, landowners and everything. And what hurt me was that was the first time in my life that anyone called me an American. I had to leave leave the country that I love to go somewhere else to be called American. That's something that still hurts to this day. And those people, only in, I believe, 2010, were even recognized by the Mexican government as official citizens. So this thing of racism is unfortunately international. And it's about gatherings like this and putting power to combating racism. It's about reparations, not just for slavery, but for my grandparents, for my uncles who were lynched, for the Jim Crow laws that prevented so many people, even in this room today, during the 1960s, like my father, who had to go through so many loopholes just to be an apprentice, to become a union sheet metal worker and help build this city. Every major project that was done between the 1970s and the early 2000s, my father was a part of, thank goodness. But the loopholes and the things that he had to overcome, the stories he would come home telling about how people would hide his tools because he was black. And we're not talking about the 1800s, this is the 1980s. But I do have faith, like Brother Cleo said, and I pray about these things, and I wanted to be a part of this today because at some point it gets to a point where you're tired of the talk and you want to be a part of that action. And I'm thankful for you all being here today. And I hope that we stay united and that we fight this as far as we can, as long as we can. It may not be in our lifetime, but if it is in our lifetime, it's great. But I thank you all for being here and just allow me a moment to share, a few stories. And I say thank you to my grandparents and to my ancestors. Because without them and their stories and fighting through all of the things that they had to go through, I know I wouldn't be here. So thank you.
Amen. I want to thank all of you for sharing your truths, for sharing your sacred stories with all of us gathered today. The next part of our evening, we're going to shift into shared communal prayer. And for the petitions, we're going to use side 1 to my left and side 2 to my right. And we will all join in the response. And the petitions can be found on the sheet that you received at the end of the church. And so we pray, God the Creator, you freed your people from slavery in Egypt. Yet the legacy of slavery and the sin of racism still affect our lives today. We ask for forgiveness and courage in ourselves to repair and redress the legacy of racism in our city, our state, and our country. For the times we ask for forgiveness. We ask forgiveness for the times that I have allowed racism in my heart. We ask forgiveness for the times I have failed to prevent discrimination. We ask forgiveness. Help us to hold our commitment for justice and peace in our city. Help us to hold our commitment
who loves and delights in all people. We are in awe before you, knowing that the spark of life within each person on earth is the spark of your divine life. Differences among cultures and races are multicolored manifestations of your light. May our hearts and minds be open to celebrate similarities and differences among our siblings. We place our hopes for a commission to address the reparations in our actions and in our presence and our neighbors. May we be committed to justice so all people can live in peace. Amen.
to support HR 40. We know that our faith calls us to be in solidarity with all who have been or are marginalized, to act for what is right and just, and to be on the side of love. We commit ourselves to educating. We commit to educating ourselves and others about HR 40, and to call for President Biden to establish a commission to study reparations via an executive order by Juneteenth, which is this weekend. Now is the time. And there's 3 ways that you can do this. The first, you can call the White House at the number listed in your program. Or you can email the White House and visit our website at networklobby.org/actnow. Or using your phone, you can scan this QR code and it will take you directly to our website and you can fill it out. Again, we thank all of you for being here. And on behalf of Network, I would like to extend our profound gratitude to Pastor Tracy Blackman, to our speakers, our truth tellers, to Sister Mary Jane for opening the doors in her beautiful church community here and welcoming us, and especially to our Cleveland Network advocates too. We could not do any of this without all of you. And so, as we end, we're going to end singing We Shall Overcome. Russ Bell, who is our wonderful musician, who is joining us from Youngstown, is going to lead us in singing. It's a song we all know. So I invite you all, as you're able, to stand up and join in song.